All right, everybody. Scott Stevens here. We're doing another live stream. We're going to do these kind of regularly and probably like just about every day during the week, and then occasionally on the weekends as weather warrants. And today being a rather tranquil day across much of the United States and Canada. However, as we got later in the day, we got some severe weather that popped up, some pretty intense storms now rumbling in through South Oklahoma, a few others up towards Green Country, northeastern Oklahoma, and then some cells that just blew up in far western South Dakota or South Carolina. You know, those southern states, those south states, let's just put it that way. All right, we're going to start with something that got me going on in weather, and that was uh, literally being an observer. That was how I got my start. I started with Boy Scouts, and then I ended up with a mentor at one of the local TV stations where I grew up in Idaho. And he didn't really have room for another weather observer at the time, but within 4 months, he said, "Hey, Scott, if something unusual happens, give me a shout here at the station." So there was one warm April day way back in 1979, and I called up Ken Torrey. That was his name at KIFI. And so today being Happy National Weather Observers Today, and I'm ever grateful for Ken, who ended up being my mentor, for taking that on. And that was really right about the beginning of my 13th birthday. So it's kind of what I needed at that age in my life when I just had a passion for something. It was astronomy and weather and economics. Those three things were kind of my go-to, my touchstone things. And so that was me on the birthday. And the parents got to take the picture of you, with your gift. And it was a weather station and the Observer's Handbook. So that's where part of how it began. This group is also going to be one where I'll be doing a show, The Success Secrets for Business, Family, and Life, under the Metadime umbrella. And this group is where we'll be broadcasting a show beginning on the 13th called Smart Perspectives. And we'll be able to discuss some of the other grander topics outside of the weather. And there is still a part of weather that impacts all of us every single day, obviously, but also reaches into food, it reaches into transportation, it reaches into so many aspects of our life. And we're dealing with this, climate crisis, as it's now called. 30 years ago, it was just global warming. 40 years ago, it was global cooling. 50 years ago, it was global cooling. So we kind of go through these phases of where we believe we know where the climate is headed. But as you know, if you watch a regular weatherman, our weather forecast models are largely the ones that the climate guys use. And we know our accuracy as we get out 7, 8, 9, 10 days really goes into the toilet. We can be incredibly wrong. And I've issued those kind of forecasts, and you're kind of relying on computer models. And that's kind of where the climate guys are right now, are using a derivative of the daily weather models for their work. For better or for worse, that's just kind of where we are in the situation. Thanks, Elizabeth, for the comment. Hey, and honestly, that is the first comment I've gotten through on Facebook. You'll usually get them through YouTube, and I'm too busy looking at maps to even notice the comments. So let's see if we can throw that up there. This would be my first. And there you go, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. So next, let's head off to temperatures where it is warm, where we'd expect to find the heat. West and central Texas, 105 degrees. San Angelo, I believe, 102 in Midland, then even 99 as you get up to Wichita Falls along the Red River, southern Oklahoma, then profoundly cooler as we move off to the north through Iowa, just in the 50s. But again, it is sunset, and we'll see exactly where the sunset here in a moment. And then New England cooling off very quickly after a rather chilly day. And indeed, DC at about 71 on the hour. And this may be DC's last day over 70 for the better part of 10 days. We've got that kind of cold coming into the eastern states. Take a look at the radar real quickly, and the rains and these thunderstorms typically are at the boundaries where we have a change in air mass. With the cooler, the drier conditions on the backside of the rain, so ahead of it, it's humid, it's muggy, and those those conditions being the fuel that fuel these kind of storms. We'll pop into the southeast, and we've got a few thunderstorm warnings. The green boxes, those being actual flood warnings for some rivers, as they can get some very heavy rain, 2, 3, 4 inches of rain in under an hour. And that's just about all the drainage systems for just about any city can handle. Pop a little farther west, and we'll see what could be kind of a rough evening as some of these cells are headed directly south. We'll cross over that Oklahoma-Texas border here shortly, and then pop on into the Dallas area, and maybe they'll hang together. Maybe they won't. Once we get past sunset, these kind of storms tend to dissipate very quickly, and you can see the terminator. That is the sunset line marching off to the west, and it's kind of nice with this new GOES imagery, geostationary environmental satellites. They're very, very, let's just say, they're far more capable than they were 30 years ago when I began in the field. And when I was interning or working in TV back in the early to middle 80s, under my mentor, they came over paper fax, literally faxed over, and then we put them up and tape them up on the wall, and that was what he shared with his audience. And what we have now is imagery that's updated literally every 5 minutes. We've got that kind of bandwidth coming in from space, so it's it's really kind of something else to see how the evolution of this industry has come along in the 30 years that I've been in it and 40 years that I've been paying attention to it. So here's that severe weather we're looking at across the deep south. Well, not quite the deep south, but verging or headed into the deep south, and then a little more showery in nature, simply dry in the west. It's dry, and it's already kind of scary dry where I am in Colorado in the San Luis Valley. We literally have not had an inch of rain since the beginning of January. It has been that dry. So we've kind of got some concerns about that as we see really no opportunities for that kind of precipitation in the near future. So let's come over the forecast. This is kind of what we looked at yesterday, and I want to update the model and come into the latest one, the run that happened at noon. And what we're interested in is the ridge that sits out west, and I'll come forward a little bit, and we'll see this ridge from sitting in the southwest, northern Mexico, the Sonora Desert, Arizona, New Mexico, the Four Corners region, and then arcing into Canada, completely arcing literally to the Arctic Circle. And this ridge, in one form or another, largely stays in place. As we get to this weekend, it arcs across the Pacific coast through British Columbia, and then with a little bit of a bubble of a high sitting over the Yukon and eastern Alaska. Now, last summer and early fall, if you recall, there were a lot of fires up in Alaska, and it was this same scenario which led to those fires. So if here we are, this is the 9th of May that this forecast it would be valid for 120 hours or 5 days out, that we see this scenario beginning. And if this is how the summer begins, the one thing I've learned in the field is this is often how the season ends. There's variability in between, but the predominant pattern remains intact. What that would mean is the west stays warm and dry, with storms held at bay off the Pacific coast. They'll try to bust through, little snippets will come through, showers, risk of thunder and lightning. Lightning not good on the dry, but nevertheless, the bulk of the rain potential remains offshore. But for the east, it would be a continuation of intermittent periods of this cold. So we see this strong high still sitting up here exactly a week from today, and remains largely in place. But what happens if we look towards the Great Lakes states, which I still want to get in front of a green wall and point this out, is right in here, is that surge after surge of cool air comes south. And we'll look at temperatures here in a bit. That lasts literally almost 2 weeks, and then the moderation happens. We get a trough forming out west, which will likely bring some showers, and then the warmth returns to the east. So that's kind of the good news, is the cold is somewhat temporary. And honestly, it better be for this time of year, because we've got farmers, there's livelihood, there's gardens, there's a lot of vegetation that is vested on being able to grow. That's the whole reason you plant a garden, is to reap a harvest. So we've got snow in through northern Pennsylvania, southern New York State. This simply in 42 hours right here, we've got the models generating some snow, and then the cold air comes in, And then another surge of cold air comes right back and through here. These are the surface winds at the surface. So the winds tend to flow not quite parallel to these lines. They're skewed in a little bit, like about 30 degrees, simply due to friction on the ground. But that's kind of what we're looking at. And then this storm winds up as we head into this weekend and then races off to the eastern seaboard. So what we might be looking at in this model is literally suggesting is lake effect snows. We've got that kind of cold rolling across lower Michigan into the Niagara Frontier, the Mohawk Valley, and then through the higher elevations in New England. And that may mean anything above about 300-400 feet would be dealing with snow, and then kind of a reinforcing surge, another little ripple dropping out of Alberta. And when I was working in Idaho, we called those Alberta Clippers, coming down from Alberta with cold air behind them. They're not typically the wettest of events, but they usually brought enough snow that it impacted travel to some degree. And we're still dealing with some light snow across Montana, Alberta, Saskatchewan, over towards Manitoba. The east turns into a little bit of rain, but really it just is parade after parade after one after another for the cold. I'm going to do one more. I do not want to look at a sounding right here, but I do want to look at temperatures. So we've got some of the weather services in Pennsylvania. Tomorrow morning, frost. These are temperatures. You see the 35, the 34, the 37, and I trust and I hope that StreamYard and Facebook and YouTube all will maintain enough resolution that you can see these numbers intact, but these are 20s and 30s. And if you look at the top the top part of this box, you can see where it's temp and 31, and that would be the temperature underneath the cursor. So it kind of lets you scroll around the map to see what the readings are going to be like. It's really kind of a powerful tool, and this would have been really nice to have had. So then 2 nights later, here we are again with temperatures into the Western Carolinas, down into the 30s, and even northern Alabama, Scottsboro, and so forth, with temperatures approaching the freezing mark, cold all the way through lower Michigan into western Wisconsin, or eastern Wisconsin, excuse me. And it happens again in another slug of cold air Friday night into Saturday morning. These are hard frost temperatures. So we're going to have a tough time getting through this weekend. We think we get a little recovery, and then no, here we are again. The morning of the 12th of May with another round of this cold air plunging all the way to the Gulf Coast. We've got those cold northerly breezes. So that's really what I really want to talk about today, because this is the news. And we've already got issues with food. We've got issues because of COVID with meatpacking plants, with processing, with farmers in Idaho and Oregon, in that deserty area outside of Boise, burying 1 million pounds of onions simply because people aren't going to Outback and eating blooming onions. We've got to completely redistribute the food that ends up in the processing stream, and that's something that can't be done in a month, maybe not even in 2 and 3 months, because farmers that are used to having their milk processed into 1-pound bags that usually ends up going to the restaurants in 20-pound bags, you can't just snap your finger and have that done. So we've got food going to the wrong places or piling up, and then farmers not being able to process the milk. It's amazing how delicate this system is. It really is. You think it's a finely tuned Swiss watch, but in reality, 1 grain of sand in that mechanism, and you've got problems, and unexpected problems showing up that you got to problem solve literally in real time. All right, this is the forecast from the Centers for Climate Prediction, the CPC. Again, we've got a story that we've talked about yesterday where it's warm in the west and cold in the east. And when you're dealing with a northerly flow where the bulk of our air is coming from Canada, which is entirely landmass, it's going to be dry. And that's over here in the Browns is largely dry. And it almost looks like there's a hint of maybe a summer monsoon trying to show up here. And that would be a case of the surface winds kind of doing this. And bringing some of that moisture in off the Gulf of Mexico through the mountains of northern Mexico and then into the American Southwest. So it's a possibility. Snow water equivalent, the California mountains, as we talked about a couple of days back, did very, very well early in the wet season, October, November, December. Even into early January, it was okay, and then it just turned dry. It's like somebody turned off the spigot and said, that's all you get. And so their snow water equivalent, or SWE, is dwindling very quickly under these kind of temperatures. With Death Valley was over 100 degrees today, as we saw earlier. So in homework for tonight, look at something called growing degree days. This is very critical, and every kind of plant, whether it's potatoes, carrots, beets, soybeans, peaches, all of these plants have a certain amount of heat that they have to get from the sun to come to maturity. So their crop can be harvested and then sent to market. And if you don't get enough growing degree days, you'll have your fall frost before the crop reaches maturity. And this was a massive problem all throughout central Canada and the north central United States last year. And I'm kind of the opinion that we are in a climate crisis, but it's driven more by the solar cycles. We can look at the other events that get more news, but nevertheless, if you look back over the centuries, if you look back over the millennium, there's a very tight correlation to solar cycles and the climate. These plants, if they get a longer growing season than their number of growing degree days requires, they'll reach to maturity, the farmers will get to the field, they'll harvest enough to market. But if they don't get enough heat, if we have a frost before the plants are mature, or a frost in the spring, like Western Colorado did, and we lost 90% of the peach crop, then there's nothing for the farmers to go into the fields and bring home. So in so many parts of the last 2,000 years, when this planet goes through cooling periods, humanity suffers. There's no way around that historical fact. So when you see news about warming temperatures, look at it through, yes, we may have above average temperatures, but was there an outlying event in that month that caused a frost, that caused an interruption in the growing of our vegetation, of our human sustenance, and even that for our pets, because they're eating out of the same fields we are. They're eating out of the same farmyards. So we're all kind of tied to this food stream. So growing degree days is critical, and see how that applies. In fact, there's some locations where you literally enter your own zip code, and mine just happens to be 81131. And our growing degree days, our year-to-date growing degree days, have just begun accumulating within the last 10 days. So our growing season is just beginning here at 8,000 feet in southern Colorado. You get to South Carolina, a much longer growing season, and so they're farther along. And indeed, our leaves are just budding out of the trees. Our season is typically so late because of elevation. All right, that's about it for the day. We'll take a look tomorrow at what happened to some of these storms across the deep south and into the southern plain states. But kind of look at your growing degree days, where you are, where the crops that your typical location grows, and where they might be impacted by what potentially will be a much shorter growing season, maybe this year, maybe next year. And what I'm thinking will have to happen probably within this decade of the 2020s is that that USDA growing zones. You look, oh, this plant will grow in a zone 6. That's going to have to be shifted 1 to 2 zones farther north because of these outlying cold events. All right, I can see there's Bob Ann. Thanks for the comments. Wanderer Seeker, Risa Smulling, and there's Gayatri. Yeah, she's my neighbor up the street. She's even greater elevation than I am. Bless your heart, folks, for tuning in. And we'll make these a regular occurrence and see what we can't bring you, and share with me what's going on in your location, what's happening in your garden. We're getting a fence put in with ours, and I'll probably be vlogging a little bit of that to see how it goes growing in this rather inhospitable climate here in southern Colorado. All right, guys, keep looking up. Have a great night.